Oh boy. Those four little words, right? We need to talk. Doesn't matter who says them, your boss, your partner, a friend, your heart just plummets. You know instinctively that a very big, very high stakes conversation is coming. But what if you could face those moments without that dread? What if you actually had a toolkit to handle them? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down right now. We're going to look at how to turn these tough talks into moments that actually solve problems. So let's get into it. First up, what are we really talking about here? I think the best way to think about it is this. Handling a crucial conversation is kind of like diffusing a bomb. You know, one wrong move, one misplaced word, and boom, the whole thing just explodes. So the research says there are three ingredients that make a conversation crucial. First, the stakes have to be high. The outcome really matters to you. Second, opinions are all over the place. You just don't see eye to eye. And third, emotions are running strong, which, let's be honest, makes it super hard to think clearly. And if you think about it, these things are happening all the time. Confronting a teammate who's just not pulling their weight, that's a crucial conversation. Asking for that promotion you were told you'd get. Yep. Even stuff like talking with a sibling about inheritance. We've all had moments like these, and for sure, we'll have them again. So, if they're so common, why are we so bad at them? Why do they go off the rails so often? Well, it turns out our own biology is kind of working against us. It all comes down to a really primal response that kicks in when we feel stressed. Here's what's happening under the hood. The second you feel threatened, your body goes into fight or flight mode. And to do that, it actually diverts blood away from the smart, rational parts of your brain and sends it to your big muscles so you can run or fight. Now, here's the problem. This means we're literally at our dumbest in the moments that require us to be our smartest. We react instead of responding. And that reaction almost always goes one of two ways: silence or violence. Silence is when we just withdraw. We might hide what we really think, change the subject, or just completely shut down. Violence, on the other hand, is when we attack. We try to control the conversation, we start labeling people, we make accusations. And here's the thing. Neither of these works. Both of them kill dialogue on the spot. So this is probably the biggest mental shift you have to make. Your goal in these conversations is not to win. It's not to be right. The goal is dialogue. It's about getting all the relevant information out into the open, creating what the experts call a pool of shared meaning, because that's where the best solutions live. Okay, let's get to our first tool. And it starts long before you ever say a word. The most important work you'll do happens right inside your own head. Because at the end of the day, the only person you can actually control is you. Now, this whole inner prep thing really comes down to two steps. First, you've got to get crystal clear on your goal. And second, you need to take a hard look at the story you're telling yourself about what's happening. That first step is all about getting your motives right. You have to literally pause and ask yourself these questions. What do I really want out of this for me? What do I want for the other person? And what do I want for our relationship in the long run? Answering these keeps you from getting sucked into just trying to win the argument. Okay, and this second step is a game changer. Our emotions, our anger or our fear, they don't come from what someone did. They come from the story we tell ourselves about what they did. So the fact is, your teammate missed a deadline. The story is, they're lazy and don't respect me. See the difference? That story is what's making you mad. If you can separate fact from story, you suddenly get to control your own emotions. All right, so you've done your homework, you've got your head straight. Now let's talk about the conversation itself. Tool number 2 is maybe the most important one of all. You have to make it feel safe, because dialogue absolutely depends on safety. And I want you to really let this sink in. People don't get defensive because of what you're saying. They get defensive because they feel unsafe. Think about it. When you feel truly safe with someone, you can talk about pretty much anything. But when you don't, even the smallest thing can set them off. So your job becomes being a safety monitor. You're constantly looking for the signs that safety is starting to disappear. Are they starting to go silent? Are they getting a little aggressive or sarcastic? Those are your big flashing warning signs. And the second you see one of those signs, you have to do something that feels totally unnatural. You have to stop talking about the issue. Just pause the content of the argument. You need to step out of the conversation to fix the feeling of unsafety first. So, how do you do that? Well, you rebuild safety with two things: mutual purpose and mutual respect. First, you show them you're on the same team. You might say something like, Look, I really do want to find a solution here that works for both of us. That's mutual purpose. Then you show them you still value them as a human, even if you disagree. Something like, I really do appreciate your perspective on this. That combination is like magic for restoring safety. Okay, once you've made it safe, now it's your turn to share your point of view. And our final tool gives you a really simple, really powerful framework for how to do that without making the other person defensive all over again. And it's a simple 3-step process. You start by sharing the facts. Then you tell your story about those facts. And then, and this is the most important part, you ask them for their story. You always start with the facts. Why? Because facts are the least controversial part of any disagreement. They're observable, they're specific, they're facts. So you don't say, you're so unreliable. You say, when you don't show up to team meetings, that's a fact nobody can argue with. Okay, once you've laid out the facts, now you can carefully share the conclusion, the story that you've drawn from them. But notice the phrasing here. You have to do it tentatively. You state it as your interpretation, not as the gospel truth. Something like, and the story I'm starting to tell myself is that you don't care about this project. It owns your feeling without being an attack. And this last step is what turns a speech into a conversation. You stop talking and you genuinely invite them to share their side of things. Can you help me understand what's really going on here? Or what am I missing? This shows you're actually curious, not just trying to prove a point. And that brings us right back to where we started, doesn't it? When you use these tools, when you start with yourself, make it safe, and share your perspective in this way, you totally change the game. The goal isn't winning anymore. It's about creating that shared pool of understanding so you can actually solve the problem together. So, as we finish up, I'll just leave you with this one question to think about. Now that you've got these tools, what's that one crucial conversation you've been putting off, and how might you try approaching it now?